Hey everyone, welcome back to our next edition of our featured rad rides, and this time we've got something pretty interesting. We've got a chopper to show you. Now, the neat thing about this chopper is, in all actuality, it's a mini chopper. I'm about 6 feet tall and just a little under 200 pounds, so this will give you some kind of perspective of about the size of this thing. We picked this one up for about $400 used. Now, had we known that we could get one new for about $900 shipped to our door, we might have waited a little while to get another one. But these things are on the internet. This particular one is a Diablo mini chopper. It is supposedly street legal. Now, I'm sure all that is dependent on your local and state codes if you're in the United States. I've never seen one on the street, so I don't take anything for granted. I would be a little apprehensive about riding it on the highway, quite honestly. But this thing will do about 55 miles an hour. It's got 4 speeds. To shift up, you actually shift down 4 times, and then vice versa, shift up to shift down, if I'm saying that right. Anyway, these actually brand new, to my understanding, come with turn signals. It's got a horn. Everything that a regular bike would have that's twice its size. It starts right up. We've ridden it around quite a bit and had a good time. Now, I've seen some things on the internet. Some people don't quite like these things. They don't believe they're meant to be out on the road. I can't say I disagree, but it's a lot of fun, and in the right areas, yeah, I think you'd get away with it and still be safe. Now, on these particular bikes, some people don't like them because they think they're made cheaply. Now, as in everything else in life, you get what you pay for. And I would say probably the worst thing about these bikes is the plastics. These plastics have a tendency to break. We've got a crack right here. Eventually, if someone was to hang on to one of these things, probably they would end up wanting to replace all the plastics, maybe with something else, you know, just all depending on what they want to use it for. We've ridden this thing quite a bit, not had any problems. When we first bought it, we had to weld this kickstand back on. Please don't look at my weld job because I am not a welder by trade. We had a hard time getting it going initially, and we're pretty concerned. We couldn't get it dialed in, couldn't get it tuned up. Turned out it was a carburetor. Learning more about these things, I found out that shipped to your door on the internet, you can get a carburetor for $30. That was a pretty easy fix. Threw the old carburetor out, and this is actually the old carburetor, and put a new one on. So that was very nice. Once we got that new carburetor on, this thing's run like a champ ever since. Neat thing about it, comes with a horn. But we like this little machine. It gets a lot of attention anywhere we go. People like it, and if you show pictures of it to people and they don't know the size, they think you've got a real custom full-size chopper. This time, we're going to go a little bit, since we had to do this on this chopper, we're going to go over tuning, cleaning out a carburetor. This can be very intimidating for some people. It's actually pretty easy. There's not a whole lot to it. You just do everything you can to keep it simple. So, when this is on the bike, there's a cable that goes down in here. Easiest thing to do, almost, is to just go ahead and unscrew it while it's on the bike to get this out of here. Before I do all that, probably I should go over all the different parts to this carburetor. Now, 2 types of carburetors like this. The biggest difference being one has a fuel adjustment pilot screw and one has an air adjustment pilot screw. This one happens to have the air adjustment. The one we put on the bike is a fuel adjustment. Doesn't really matter. The air adjustment screw adjusts the amount of air going into the pilot circuit, and the fuel adjustment screw obviously adjusts the amount of fuel going into the pilot circuit. We'll learn more about that. You'll know which type of carburetor you have because if you split this carburetor in half, this side on this particular carburetor, this is the side that goes towards the air filter, and this is the side that goes towards the motor. Since the screw is on the side that goes towards the air filter, this is a carburetor that has an air screw adjustment. If it was on the other side over here, it would be a fuel adjusted pilot circuit. So, what I took apart here initially is just where the cable goes, and it attaches to the slide. Now we'll learn more about the slide after we take this thing apart. I'm going to use an automatic screwdriver to take some of this apart. If you're putting one together, do not do that. Use a regular screwdriver, because if you strip anything out, it would be very bad juju. What I'm taking off here is the float bowl. This is where all the gas goes. This is where the fuel line went. The fuel goes straight down into this line right here and into this float bowl. Alright, as you can see, this one's very dirty. We didn't do anything to try and clean it out. The first thing typically that I do is get a bunch of carburetor cleaner and start cleaning all these parts. There's the float. Now, we're going to assume whenever we clean and do adjustment on one of these that everything on the bike is stock, and this is for mini bikes, for scooters. These carburetors are all very typically similar. So we're going to assume that everything else on the bike or whatever it is you're working on is in good working condition. That's very important, because you can adjust a carburetor all day long, and if something else is not working properly, it won't matter. You'll never get it dialed in right. So assuming that everything else is in good working condition, we're going to clean this thing out. And this is a typical float right here. There are a couple different types of floats. On this one right here, it is held in place by that little needle right there. It comes out, and here is your fuel inlet needle right here. So, okay, then what we've got left on the bottom here is your pilot circuit jet and your main jet. Typically, no adjustment made on these unless you make modifications to the motor. An example of that would be if you put a filter pod or a header on, you're going to have to go with a bigger main jet. I would suggest getting on the internet, going to a shop of some kind. Typically, there's people that have done the same types of modifications. They can tell you very easily, usually, what size jet you will need. So, this is what everyone refers to as the main jet. And here is the pilot jet. So, after all these parts are taken apart, rubber gasket out of there, all of that, you're going to want to run carburetor cleaner through there and make sure everything is clean, because typically if you have a problem with the carburetor, it usually has to do with cleanliness. Alright, now I'm not going to take this out of here, but this would come out of here too. You don't want any chemicals damaging it. So from this point on, you would spray carburetor cleaner down into each of these holes. Alright, you can see the choke right here. This is choke on, this is choke off. Now, okay, so we've got all that. Let's say we've taken carburetor cleaner and we've cleaned all that out. Alright, so we're good to go. So assembly is just going to be the reverse. One other thing I've forgotten. Alright, here's our air fuel adjustment screw. Here's our idle screw. Now I'll show you more about the idle screw and show you exactly how that works as we're putting it back together. But this is another part that needs to come apart. Before you do that, the first thing to do whenever you need a baseline to start from when you're tuning a carburetor. So you want to count exactly how far out these screws were turned before you remove them. So what we're going to do, we're going to turn this in half a turn, one turn, another half a turn. That's about 1 3/4 right there. Now we can take it apart. We know we need to come 1 3/4 back out from a seated position. Whenever you screw these in, you need to lightly seat them. Do not screw them in hard. Especially on a fuel adjustment pilot screw, you can damage that screw very easily. So we'll take that out. We know we're 1 3/4 on that one. And there will be a little spring that's in there. That is to keep it from vibrating out of position. Once again, on the idle screw, half a turn, 1 turn, 1 1/2, 2. Alright, so we'll back it out. Take it out, and there's a spring. Alright, now you would spray carburetor cleaner through that whole thing and make sure everything in there is just surgically spotless. Anything you can do to keep that thing clean. Alright, so obviously installation is the opposite of removal. Put this back in, lightly seat it all the way. And on this one, we needed to come back out 2 turns, so half a turn, 1 1/2, 2. Now, whenever you're putting these together, if you don't know what your baseline was for where these screws were, typically you want to start about 2 turns out on both of them. That's a good place to start. Whenever you have your carburetor tuned properly on the air adjustment or on the fuel adjustment pilot circuit, they should be turned out between 1 1/2 and 3 turns. If you are any more or any less than that, it is time to start making adjustments to that carburetor, but that's a little more advanced, so we'll go over that some other time. So this was 1 3/4, so half, 1, 1 1/2, 1 3/4. All right. Now, on the slide, make sure, I've seen some slides that can go in that they will go in either way. You have to make sure the slide goes in the same way it came out. On this one, it's real easy. If you look down inside this thing, let me grab a flashlight real quick. You look down in there, there are 2 nipples sticking out. One goes about 3/4 of the way up that shaft, and the other one is down at the bottom. So if you look at the slide, the one that goes 3/4 up obviously is going to need a full length of travel along that slide. On the opposite side, this is where the other one will fit. So, alright. Take a look. This will come apart. This is something to remember for future reference if you ever do carburetor adjustment for something that is not stock, or altitude will change things drastically on a carburetor, things like that. Alright, so this comes out of here. If you'll notice, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 grooves on this needle. This is your slide needle. Now, the slide needle is affected by throttle position. Almost everything on these carburetors, when you're tuning them, is determined by throttle position. This slide needle comes into effect from about 1/4 to about 3/4 throttle. So we're going to put this back in. We'll go more on that later. if you'll notice, when I'm putting this retainer clip in, it has to go with that opening facing that long travel for that nipple that goes up and down right there. The reason why is when you hook a cable back in, and you'll know when you take this apart, that cable has a little barrel on the end of it that has to fit back up through here and slides back up in there. Since we don't have our cable hooked up, you can't see that on this one, but if you take one apart, you'll see it. So we're going to make sure we put this back in correctly, like this. Spring on. All these are somewhat different and yet still very similar. Okay, carburetor don't play. Alright, so put our main jet back in. Actually, let's do the pilot jet first. Once you get into modifications on these things, these are some of the things you'll change out for performance. Careful not to over tighten this thing too. No need to. It'll stay in place. Alright. Put our fuel inlet needle back in. Now I am not the know-all tell-all on these carburetors. There are people much smarter than me doing these things, so make sure you do your research. Get advice from others. If you're taking one apart for the first time, see if you can find somebody that's done it themselves. There is a wealth of information on the internet. Alright. Put our gasket back on. Alright. And that was relatively painless. Once again, not using the powered screwdriver, it would be very embarrassing to not be able to put this float bowl back on. Alright, so a little bit about adjusting these things. If you look down in here, you can see the slide and where we had it. Whenever you pull your throttle back, that slide is going to go up. See if I can do this. It will go up like so. When you're at full throttle, that's what you're going to see through the carburetor when that thing's running. Alright? So, adjusting your idle speed. This is actually secondary, but I can show you what happens when you turn your idle set screw. If you'll notice, as you turn that idle set screw in on this one, that slide goes up. When I back it out, it brings it back down. That's what determines your idle. And you'll know you're not going to hurt anything on this thing. That will let you know. You'll hear it in the motor when you're adjusting it. All right, now this one. Once again, this is an air adjustment screw for the pilot circuit. So as I back it out, I let more air in, and it leans out the fuel ratio in the pilot circuit. If I did that on the if I have one over here on the fuel side, if I were to back it out, it would add more fuel, allow more fuel to go through the carburetor in the pilot circuit, and it would richen the circuit. All that is not really, you'll know as you're turning in and screwing out exactly, what's going on. You'll hear it in a motor. Like I said, if you don't have a baseline, start about 2 turns out. The thing that you want to do is try and get your idle as high as possible, and then up to 8 throttle, you want to make sure the motor's not bogging down or chuttering. And to keep things simple, basically you want to make sure that the motor sounds good as you're backing that throttle back. Now, whenever you're working on these things, sometimes it's hard to tell, okay, I've adjusted my pilot screw as much as I can and I'm still having problems with the way the bike's running. Alright, now throttle position is all important in knowing how to adjust a carburetor. And one of the things that I've done is I pulled a chart off the internet. This is just something I pulled off the internet that will tell you. Alright, this right here, this part of the graph is your pilot circuit. As you can tell, up to about an 8 throttle is where it is mostly affected. Now it's going to continue to work through the full range, but it works mostly up through 8 throttle. Now if you've gotten past 8 throttle and you're starting to hit that throttle from about a quarter on to about 3/4 throttle and you're having problems, that's when you're looking at your slide and the slide needle, that adjustment that I showed you that's on the needle that's got the 4 grooves on it. Now that will come into effect at things like different altitudes and things like that. Once again, if this bike is completely stock and everything is in good working order, chances are you're not going to have to mess with that much. Now, as you can see, from just below half throttle to full throttle, if you're having problems in that range, then you're looking at a main jet. Typically you're only going to have problems like that if maybe you've changed jets out, or you put a filter pod on, or you put a header on, or a combination thereof. That is when you will see this drastically affected. On an all-stock bike with nothing having changed and everything in good working order, typically about the only thing you're going to have to adjust is your pilot circuit. And your ears are going to be your best tool for that. You want to get the idle as high as you can on this pilot circuit. Once you've done that, then you're going to adjust your idle screw to make sure that it's idling about where it needs to be. So play with it. That's the best thing I can tell you, is play with it. The more you play with it, the more you learn. If you have made some adjustments, such as an air filter and a header, chances are you might need to adjust your needle. And if you do that, if you raise the clip up towards the top end of that needle, it's going to drop that needle down. It's going to lean out the mixture. If you take that clip and you move it down towards the bottom of the needle, it's going to raise the needle up and enrichen the mixture. So it's one of those things, it's trial and error. There is no set formula. Every bike is going to be different. That's pretty much it. Hopefully I haven't confused people too much, and I've done the best that I can to kind of go through the basics. Once again, there's people out there that are much smarter than me doing this, but I'd say the best thing to do is to get out there and play with it and try. If you don't understand from anything that I've done, get on the internet. I've had to do it myself, do some research. It'll be alright. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and until next time. happened. Slapped a new carburetor on there for $30. The thing is running like a champ ever since. I've not started up in a while. Choke right here. You gotta be kidding me. This thing busts off every time. It's out of gas.